Once upon a time, a samurai from Japan learned one of life's cruelest lessons: that evil was bigger than his sword. So he followed the footsteps of his brother to the Wild West where he... Wait, that's the wrong game. Though Samurai Western is like a distant relative to Rising Zan anyway. Released somewhere between Way of the Samurai 2 and 3, Samurai Western found its way to the PlayStation 2 near the end of that console's life, shaking off the Groundhog Day role-playing aspects of the series it's part of, and instead finding its own identity as a stylish Wild West brawler. Samurai Western follows Gojiro Kiryu, a samurai who came to a small town in the US in search of his brother to restore his honor.
Well, what do you plan to do with him if you find him, stranger?
You know, by killing him. His search leads him right in the middle of a conflict between a local scumbag politician and the poor town terrorized by his goons. Living by the honorable code of samurai, Gojiro can't help but get involved with the conflict, saving the townsfolk in the hope that it brings him closer to his brother. It's not the greatest story, but I like how it's told.
Maybe your man's there too. But I can't really say no more. You just get yourself on over to that ghost town, Mr. Samurai. You hear?
Before the start of every stage, you get a one-sided dialogue from one of the supporting cast members. Here they give you their perspectives or talk about their hopes for the future.
He called himself a samurai, and his name was Gojiro Kiryu. The moment we saw him, Claudia and I knew this breeze would soon turn into a storm.
Fleshing out the setting without them monologuing to a stoic main character's face. It's a small consideration, but with Gojiro impatient to chase after any trace of his brother, it does a lot to preserve the urgency of his quest without abandoning the plot altogether.
So many of our honest citizens are keeping an eye out for me. I've been waiting for this, a chance to protect my town against evil.
The pre-stage story ramblings also gives us some extremely realistic racism.
Mr. Samurai, I am an open-minded man. You are a visitor to our country, and we're no doubt confused as to the way we do things here. So I will overlook the great rudeness that you have shown me and my associates. I am a man of equality and fair judgment. So no matter what inferior race you belong to, if you are strong, I will find a use for you as I build my perfect, orderly utopia here on the Western Plains.
It almost makes me wonder what the studio had to deal with from Western publishing branches over the years. Samurai Western's not something you play for the story though. The story is there as an excuse for the setup behind the action, and Samurai Western's got some really good action. There's a lot of types of brawlers and action games out there, especially on the PlayStation 2, but very few can keep up with the flow of Samurai Western, and that flow alone makes the entire game so immensely satisfying to play. Combat is straightforward. You get your combo attack and a dodge. These are your bread and butter. Everything comes down to how well you can dodge and how fast you can slide and dice. Besides this, you can guard and deflect bullets, which looks a lot cooler than it actually is useful. There's also the ability to pick up items and throw them. And a devil trigger sort of power boost. One that has some nuance with what kind of power you get depending on how much of the meter you filled up before triggering it. Actions besides attacking and dodging are a lot less useful or important to the core gameplay though. They're minor options that add some variety to the gameplay. Even if the back-to-back instant kills of a full meter being triggered are really fun in their own right though. And Samurai Western's design knows this, with the customization options focusing on keeping the main two aspects of combat intact, attacking and dodging. These are kept in the forefront while pushing the rest back even further based on preference, but we'll get back into that later. Stage design in Samurai Western is very interesting. Stages are more like maps that enemies spawn in, with preset waves depending on how far from the start you walked, or how many enemies you've already cut down. In most stages, there isn't much of an endpoint to the stage you make your way towards. Instead, there's an enemy that you can cut down to cause the stage to end. Meaning that sometimes you can rush towards a single enemy, cut them down, and get the stage to end early. Or, if you want to drag things out, there's always plenty of waves of enemy spawns to keep fighting until you've had your fill. Though there is a limit to them, they're not exactly infinite.
I will enjoy this fight as I would have fine wine, to the last drop.
In most games, this would get tedious, but Samurai Western's gameplay is just so satisfying that I still ran through a bunch of the stages multiple times after clearing them, just to take down a couple of more enemies before ending the stage. That's actually my main gripe with how stages work. Sometimes you just don't want the stage to end yet and you accidentally take down the target bad guy who is indistinguishable from the other bad guys. But that's not even the main thing I found interesting about the combat in Samurai Western. Samurai Western is an action game where you play as a melee-focused protagonist fighting against a huge number of bad guys armed with guns. In a lot of games, this quickly becomes frustrating. Nothing is more aggravating than being stuck as a melee character up against ranged enemies in most games. Even if the distances during combat aren't too big, especially if they're allowed to attack off-screen, which they are in this case. Samurai Western gets around a lot of the problems by having a lot of audio and visual signals leading up to the attacks, way more than other games bother with. Before attacking, enemies will first call out their incoming attack with a voice line, shortly followed with the sound of them cocking their gun. Dodge the incoming fire and you get multiple cues showing your success, from the bad guy shouting in awe and frustration, Gojiro saying "Mieru," that he can see the bullets coming in, as well as all the high-speed dodge rolls indicating the successful dodge instead of the typical slide he does. And oh man, I love that standard slide he does. Somehow, even that's satisfying to do, even next to the dodge roll animation that highlights your success. Then there's also a lot of hints at what's going on overlaid on top of the gameplay. Enemies often have smoke coming from the gun they fired, giving them some extra presence from the background. The area around them often distorts in the blistering heat of the action, drawing your eye towards that movement, even if the enemies are standing still. And on top of all of that, there's also a radar, not just giving away the location of nearby enemies even while they're off screen, but the enemy markers change color if they're about to attack. So you don't know just where the enemies are, you can still track which ones are making the pre-attack sounds while they're off screen, making it easier to keep a visual on enemies not on the screen and what they're doing without much of a hassle. A lot of modern action games to this day still struggle with giving an easily readable audio cue for off-screen attacks. Meanwhile, Samurai Western wrote a book on traffic laws for the amount of incoming ranged assault headed your way off-screen that you can still read at all times. It's extremely impressive. Beyond the satisfying combat itself though, there's a surprising amount of replayability here. Which, I know, is a shocker for a game by the way of the Samurai developers. But I was still surprised how much Samurai Western had going for it in the long term after finding out how straightforward the stages were. And what really helps with that is the customization options the game gives you. Before every stage, you get the option to swap out your sword for a different unlocked one, and a lot of the different swords have completely different movesets, enabling or disabling certain basic features entirely. So you get the one-handed sword that lets you double jump but doesn't deal crazy damage. You can dual wield two swords but lose the ability to throw. Not like throwing really matters, but it's nice to have options like that. There's even a Batojutsu style sword with no blocking or deflection in the game for all you Rurouni Kenshin fans out there. Besides the swords, there's also accessories. All of the accessories have bonus stats, while making you look as cool or as goofy as you want Gojiro to look. You can also move them around and skill them freely, so there's a pretty big amount of customization freedom here for a PlayStation 2 era game. Though Samurai Western also had quick saving already, so the developers were pretty ahead of the curve on that. Then there's challenges, where you can limit your options even further, adding a little bit of extra difficulty to the stages, in case you want to replay a stage with a different moveset, but the stage itself has become too easy to do so normally. And on top of all of this, once you've beaten the game, there's a hard mode that lets you redo all the stages, but with much stronger enemies and more aggressive enemy spawns. Once you're in hard mode, you can unlock different character models to play as, so you can play looking like the bad guys or characters from cutscenes. Running through random bandits as one of their own is pretty fun. There's even a little girl character for all you Rurouni Kenshin authors out there. One really great detail that the game does is that the customization and unlocked character models are all reflected back in the cutscenes. I'm always a big fan of games that do this. All of this said, Samurai Western can be a bit jank. It's an action game by people who make open-world role-playing simulators, and it shows at times. It's especially noticeable when trying to jump on top of objects. The few times you want to jump on top of an obstacle because there's an enemy standing on it, it feels really bad to do, like the game doesn't quite know what to make of this. Thankfully, there's no major platforming sections in the game, so it's clear the developers must have known their limitations well enough not to stress them. Emulated, there can be some slowdown, at least there is for me playing on an older i5 processor. I've heard it's a lot better with newer, stronger processors like i7s, and as much as I've fiddled with the settings, the most I can do is get the drops to never go below 80%. It's a late PlayStation 2 era game with a lot of big, spacious areas, so it might have been a lot for the PlayStation 2 to handle as is, so I can't be too mad about it. It definitely didn't stop me from having a good time with the game though. Also, one thing that I learned when putting together this video was that Acquire's Way of the Samurai games, including Samurai Western, were published by Spike. Spike also published Kenka Bancho games in Japan, and that's something that really makes sense to have under one publisher, doesn't it? And yeah, that's the same Spike that would later merge with Chunsoft to become Spike Chunsoft. Samurai Western is a very easy recommendation. It might not be the prettiest game, or have the best story, or the easiest to listen to sound design, but it's got some of the most satisfying, fast-paced action this side of the West, and I love it for that. Speaking of this side of the West, I asked people on Patreon a question. What kind of character arc is cooler? A cowboy going to the east and learning to become a samurai, or a samurai going to the west and learning to become a cowboy? This one got pretty close, but the cowboy gaining the soul of a samurai won. I think I like samurai becoming a cowboy more. It's not done as often, but an honorable cowboy infusing martial arts into their gunplay as if it's equilibrium gun katas, that's something I want to see more often. Not entirely related, but if you made it to this point in the video, you should go read Renjo Desperado. It's very good. Anyway, this video was brought to you by the people supporting the channel on Patreon. If you would like to become one of the names that you see scrolling on the screen and vote in future polls, head over to patreon.com/AboveUp and I will, see ya.